any sort of personal growth, right?
No, I'm not sure who I should worry about. The government?
Because he does it every single time.
Was there an insurance claim after any of the ends are switching identities?
She-Hulk has come to an end, and yeah, that was something. I'm not sure what it was, but it was definitely something. Now look, I have talked about this show on the channel before. The first 2 episodes of She-Hulk were the catalyst for this video that I made on the overall issues of the MCU and why I think the MCU is falling apart. But here we are, 7 episodes and an entire first season later, and it got worse. But it also got a little bit better as well. Let me explain. She-Hulk overall, I think, is a bad series that has moments of potential, but it suffers from extremely B-tier writing, a lack of focus. It shoves things down the viewer's throat through poorly executed comedy. And I know I just called this show a comedy, but don't worry, we will get to that. She-Hulk ultimately wanted its cake, but it wanted to eat it too. It wanted to poke fun at this and that whilst doing the very things it's poking fun at. And I think the finale of She-Hulk pretty much solidified that notion for me. She-Hulk, all in all, just basically embodies everything that is wrong with the MCU. Like, if you want to know what is wrong with the MCU in a nutshell, She-Hulk basically sums it up perfectly. Everything down to the jokes falling flat, the show writing itself into a corner and trying to be super meta to just try and bail itself out, to the cameo scapegoats that they use to make audiences think the show is actually a lot better than it really is. So let's get into why She-Hulk is bad and why it is everything that is wrong with the MCU.
Morning.
MCU comedy. How the mighty have fallen. Remember when the MCU was actually funny? She-Hulk has a lot of issues. But the biggest crime that She-Hulk makes, to me, is that it's just not funny. She-Hulk is a show that's designed to essentially live and die by its comedy, its jokes, its ability to make the viewer laugh. For a show that hurls jokes and funny moments at you constantly without remorse, it's honestly mind-blowing to me how many of the jokes failed to land. The MCU has had a comedy problem for a while now. Thor Love and Thunder and She-Hulk both put it in big bold capital letters for me that the MCU has a big joke problem. Gone are the days where the comedy felt natural and organic, where the actors' natural charisma and comedic timing were enough to allow the comedy to flow on screen. Now, it just seems like actors are trying to be funny because the script is telling them to be funny. There were 2 scenes that gave me a chuckle in She-Hulk in the entire show, with all of the jokes that it threw at me. One of those was when Old Mate throws himself out the window because it's basically just encapsulating what I wanted to do in that moment, and Daredevil doing a walk of shame. Everything else was pretty cringe. Speaking of cringe, let's talk about the 4th wall breaks because this is a huge part of this show. Breaking the 4th wall in films and shows is pretty hard to do well. Deadpool done it masterfully. She-Hulk did not. For the most part, the 4th wall breaks in She-Hulk I found to be very poorly done, and you can just tell that the writers of the show thought that these 4th wall breaks were going to be so smart and so funny, but they really weren't. Tatiana Maslany, bless her, she can try all she wants, but the breaking of the 4th wall in She-Hulk just doesn't work. Now, I know that this is all a part of the comics. I get that. I understand that. I'm not even saying that it shouldn't be in the show. I think it should be. But what I do know is, regardless of what happens in the comics, the 4th wall breaking in She-Hulk just does not translate. Now, is Deadpool an unfair comparison for 4th wall breaks? Maybe. After all, it has an R rating to make the 4th wall breaks even funnier with darker humor, but it's kind of hard to not compare She-Hulk with Deadpool when it comes to the 4th wall breaks, because that's what I felt like they were trying to do. I don't even think there was one instance of a 4th wall break in She-Hulk where I thought, yeah, that completely works, that was smart. I did low-key like the X-Men thumbs up in the finale. That's about the only time I found it to be funny. When I watch Deadpool, basically every 4th wall break I think is just hilarious. Because it's just done better. It doesn't feel like Ryan Reynolds is doing what the script tells him to in those moments. It just feels like it's Ryan Reynolds saying what Ryan Reynolds would say in that moment. And this isn't a question of talent because Tatiana Maslany is an outstanding actress. She can pull this off. The problem is on the page. The fourth wall breaks in Deadpool work as a comedic break in tone. But all of this falls back into She-Hulk just not being as smart of a show as it thinks that it is. It thinks it's delivering side-splitting humor and being extremely meta, but the comedy of She-Hulk most of the time just ends up falling flat. The funniest parts of She-Hulk are the parts that aren't even intended to be funny, and that's when you know you've truly failed at comedy. Look, the MCU's joke problem, I think, is at its worst in two recent properties, those being Thor Love and Thunder and She-Hulk. To be honest, I still can't believe I'm actually putting Thor Love and Thunder in the same conversation as She-Hulk, but the fact that the guy that gave us Jojo Rabbit can't even pull off comedy in the MCU now is just extremely concerning for where this franchise is going. The fact that Love and Thunder's story consisted of a villain whose daughter died in his arms, to which he goes on a rampage killing all gods, and then Jane Foster gets diagnosed and dies of cancer, how that ends up being an over-the-top joke fest, I will never know. Like, does everything have to be a joke with this franchise now? Remember when the MCU could actually shed a tear from its viewers? To draw a direct comparison, Guardians of the Galaxy has a similar moment with Star-Lord's mother, who passes away from cancer. Yet Guardians of the Galaxy as a movie is absolutely hilarious. It just knew when to take things seriously and when the comedy should strike. That nuance in the handling of comedy is completely gone from the MCU now. It's like the folks over at Marvel actually think audiences are literally stupid. In phases 1 to 3, sure, the jokes overstayed their welcome sometimes, but Jesus, at least when Tony died, Killmonger, Yondu, Loki, Natasha, Gamora, when they all died, the films knew to park the jokes for 5 seconds and let the viewers know that what was happening is actually pretty serious. And not a parody, because that's exactly what I feel like the MCU has become, a parody of itself. It's so crazy that one of the best things about the MCU, which was its comedy, is now one of the worst things. These shows and films try to get by on nostalgia, cameos, and joke bombardment. And as a fan of the MCU, when it actually took itself somewhat seriously and also knew when to have fun, it's really hard to sit here and watch what the MCU is evolving into. If there is one outlier in the slate of MCU sludge of recent years that actually used comedy well, I think it would be Moon Knight and maybe Spiderman No Way Home. The jokes weren't thrown at you every 5 seconds. The serious subject matter actually had time to take itself seriously. Yeah, Moon Knight fell away at the end, but at least that show didn't feel like the worst fast food you've ever had. Which is exactly what Love and Thunder feels like, and it's exactly what She-Hulk feels like. Now, I know I've been shitting on Phase 4 of the MCU, so I do want to throw a bit of a shout out to Spider-Man No Way Home, because I feel like that film did probably balance the drama and comedy better than anything else, even Moon Knight. And I mean, wouldn't you know it, it's probably 99.9% of people's favorite Phase 4 product. Coincidence?
I think not!
The failure at comedy in She-Hulk just comes at the pure expense of the characters as well. Jen Walters, there is a good character there, somewhere. There is a relatability to Jen. There is sympathy to her character that makes her somewhat endearing. But the failed comedy of She-Hulk just doesn't add anything to her character. It detracts from the good character work and base that Jen Walters has. It seems like the writers over at Marvel have completely lost the ability to make characters that are funny, but are also, you know, good characters. Take Thor, for example. Thor was an okay character in phases 1 and 2, but he became great in phase 3. Now, he has been completely dumbed down to the point of parody for the sake of a joke. Like, why? Chris Hemsworth has incredible comedic timing. The dude's hilarious. And he has proven that he can balance comedy with strong emotional weight. Look at Ragnarok and Infinity War. So why backflip and turn him into a caricature of what he once was? That's ultimately what all of the characters in She-Hulk actually feel like. They don't feel like characters, they feel like caricatures. Is this just what Marvel is now? Because if it is, I'm glad that Tony and Steve are gone. I'd hate to see what the current writers over at Marvel would do to butcher their characters. But regardless of that, for me, She-Hulk just fails at being funny, and that is its ultimate crime. A show so reliant on its humor landing, having almost none of it landing is just a damn shame. Look, I am excited to see Tatiana Maslany as Jen Walters in future roles interacting with other characters within the MCU. I think she'd fare well in an ensemble cast. But as for her place in this show specifically, it just doesn't work because it wasn't funny.
Morning.
Now, it's no mystery to any fan of Marvel or Star Wars right now that the only thing that seems to hold any of these films or shows up anymore are the cameos or the straight up nostalgia. Look, we all knew that Daredevil was coming in this show. Ultimately, this show kind of makes the most sense for it as well. This, after all, is a legal drama / comedy. I feel kind of sick saying that it's a comedy or even a drama, but by genre, that's technically what the show is. So it does make sense to bring Matt Murdock into She-Hulk. Now, I know a lot of fans had a lot of concerns when we found out that Matt Murdock was being brought into the MCU. Are they going to water him down into a Disney-fied version of what we know? Well, yeah, they kind of did. But it wasn't as bad as I thought. I thought they were going to completely destroy Daredevil in this show, and at times I swear they tried to.
My ass remains unwhooped.
His introduction episode, I actually think overall was a half decent episode and by far the best episode of the series. Largely because Tatiana Maslany and Charlie Cox carry the shit out of the episode and make it watchable. They even try to tribute the famous hallway fight scene. It wasn't great here, but I mean, it's clear what they're trying to cash in on. But I mean, seeing Matt Murdock do a walk of shame also was not exactly what I was expecting. But in the vein of a show like this was actually one of the extreme rare cases that the show actually succeeded in being funny. Daredevil's arrival in this show is also literally highlighting everything that is wrong with the MCU right now. Take a look at all the episode ratings on IMDb. I know it's not always a reliable source of information, the ratings on IMDb, but take a wild guess at which episode was the Daredevil episode. This proves my point. Cameo scapegoats are what this franchise is about now, and it's like Marvel know it and are just embracing it. The fact they needed Matt Murdock to come into this show to make it somewhat enjoyable is just sad. If they focused less on being super meta and throwing these messages around that the show just has not earned, then maybe they wouldn't need a cameo to come in and save the show. I really do find it hilarious that this show was trying to be super meta by poking fun at how so many shows and films these days are just all about cameos and nostalgia. But that ended up being about the only thing that actually made She-Hulk worth watching. It needed the nostalgia cameo scapegoat that it seems like every MCU project these days needs. Look, at the end of the day, one of your favorite characters coming out of nowhere in a show isn't always a bad thing. It can be a nice surprise. I'm not saying a show shouldn't have cameos, but Jesus, Marvel, chill. Like, it's at the point now where the first sign of speculation for a new show or film is pretty much based on what the cameos are going to be. Who are we going to see in the show? And to be fair, this isn't just a Marvel thing. Star Wars has the exact same problem. Andor is a breath of fresh air because it's trying to tell its own story and put story, world building, and character first, instead of just cameoing its way to victory, and fans for some reason think that it's boring. Because Luke Skywalker didn't show up, or Ahsoka Tano didn't show up. But then the second fans get a glimpse of Starkiller's armor in the background of an episode, they all of a sudden like the show now. My point is, Marvel are just simply catering to what viewers seem to want these days. Original stories? Nah, just give me Professor X. Just give me Matt Murdock. Just give me Wong in every freaking show and film across the MCU. Marvel need to get their shit together and cut this cameo scapegoat crap. How many times can a known character come into the tail end of a Disney Plus show to try and save it from its own poor writing? They've done it multiple times already. I mean, look at Hawkeye. Kingpin, that version of Kingpin wasn't saving Hawkeye, but they tried. My point is, fan service is fine. Like, I'm a fan, service me, but at least try and tell a good story first. The fan service, the cameos, the nostalgia, it all has its place, but it's supposed to be the cherry on top, not the entire fucking cake, Marvel. She-Hulk's finale pretty much summed all of this up for me as well. They essentially admit to writing a half-baked story and in this super meta way try and poke fun at the show's own poor writing. Like, we literally watched the show write itself into a corner and then the show just gave up and started laughing at itself. Like, they're poking fun at all these things that happen in the show, but then turn around and just do it anyway. It's like, what? Is that what you're trying to do? Is that the entire point of this show? If so, then, well, I think that's just a terrible creative choice, but anyway. I felt throughout this show's entire run that I was pretty much just done with it. I was going to stop watching. After about the 4th or 5th episode, I was like, nah, I think I'm out. Like, the show is just not doing it for me. So I stopped watching. Then 3 weeks had passed and I just felt like I wasn't even keeping up on the overall MCU. And this is a part of the problem with the MCU. You come across shows like She-Hulk and you don't like it, and all people say to you is, well, if you don't like it, then don't watch it. That's a sound theory, but you kind of need to watch it if you want to keep up to date with the MCU. You can't just cast these shows aside the second you don't like them, because the ones you're actually interested in tie back to the ones you want to skip. Like, I'm super interested in the Daredevil series. I can't wait for that because I love Daredevil, but he's getting properly introduced in She-Hulk, where blanks will be filled in before the show comes out so it can just hit the ground running. So of course I'm going to end up watching She-Hulk. And I really hate that because this is the kind of show that I just would have stopped watching. I brought this up in my last video talking about the MCU, that keeping up with these shows feels like homework instead of entertainment. You watch the shit you hate just to enjoy the stuff you actually like. And that notion for me has only increased now that She-Hulk is finished. I felt like I watched the show out of obligation more than anything, and that really bugs me. Phases 1 to 3 of the MCU, I never wanted to miss a thing, but now it truly feels like I'm watching shows because I need to, or I'm not going to know what the hell's going on with the shows that I actually care about. But anyway, let's put a little bit of focus on the VFX of She-Hulk, because this isn't just a She-Hulk problem, this is an MCU problem. Look, sometimes She-Hulk CGI is fine. It's not as bad as the internet makes it out to be, but I saw someone say that a certain scene in She-Hulk looked like a FIFA cutscene, and I literally lost my mind. I could not stop laughing because it's actually so true and I can't unsee it. And it's not just the She-Hulk CGI. Even Matt Murdock's floating head in the Daredevil episode looked absolutely awful. And I mean, what is this? CGI Daredevil? Yeah, no thank you. Now look, I know all of this probably comes down to VFX artists getting worked into the ground and being expected to meet all of these ridiculous deadlines, but that's just another notch on the belt of Marvel slowly killing off what made the MCU so great in the past. I mean, if you don't have the time in the release schedule to pull these kinds of character designs off, then don't do it. Would it seriously hurt Marvel to go practical one time? Like, seriously. And I do love that in the finale, they even dared to go near the topic of Marvel's VFX artists, especially given everything that's come out in recent times regarding their VFX artists being worked into the ground. Look, I really tried to give She-Hulk a chance, even though the show got off to a really bad start. Now, you guys that saw my recent MCU video would know that I don't really care for politics. I watch films and shows and judge them on their merits as a film or a show, not by my political stance. So if you want a bit of social commentary in your films, I don't care as long as it's nuanced and services the story or its characters. She-Hulk was absolutely not nuanced with what it wanted to say. Like, trying to tear shreds down off Bruce Banner in the opening episode was not exactly a good foot for this show to get started on. The writers wanted to push this idea of how women live in fear and control their anger because they have to because of their gender and everything that comes with it. But maybe don't make your target one of the most tortured and isolated characters in the entire MCU. The same dude who literally had to spit a bullet out of his own mouth.
Just in case you needed to kill me, but you can't. I know, I tried. I got low. I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out.
Infinitely more than you.
You know, probably go for another character if you want to get that point across. What I'm saying is this show had absolutely zero nuance in its writing. It wanted to throw these messages at you, but it done it with the intelligence and subtlety of a 5-year-old. Like, there is nothing wrong with a film or show being used as a mouthpiece for a real-life message. Great films have been doing this since the inception of film. But it's shows like She-Hulk that think they're a lot smarter than they actually are, that just slap you over the head with it with absolutely zero nuance. And then play it off like it's being super meta and super smart, but in reality, it just comes off as incredibly out of touch. Let's take a look at Jennifer Walters for a second. Do I think she's a bad character? No, I don't. I think Jen is fine. Tatiana Maslany makes the character at times bearable because she's a great actress. But the writing of the show is what lets this character down. The ham-fisted, in-your-face messages portrayed through the character at times just makes you wonder if the writers even wanted you to like the character in the first place. But then we'll get scenes where she's being super relatable and super likable, where she's doing something as simple as checking her phone every 5 seconds. Or she's gone off somewhere where there's no phone service and walks around with her phone in the air trying to get signal. Admit it, we've all been there. It's super relatable. This is what I mean when I say that She-Hulk wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to portray Jen as this super likable and relatable character, but then it just uses her as a mouthpiece for a poorly constructed form of social commentary that makes you just not like the character at all. Social commentary can work in MCU films. I still think the final scene of Black Panther where T'Challa talks about people finding a way to work with one another, this was great. It's a good message. It brings people together. But more importantly, it works in the context of the film and the real world. She-Hulk has no such nuance or taste in what it's trying to say. It's just throwing daggers at its viewers, and the show is nowhere near as smart as it thinks it is to be able to pull that off. Take a look at The Boys, for example. The social commentary and political jabs in that show are absolutely off the charts and do not hold back. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left, on the right, the show doesn't care. You're not safe from the show throwing shade at you. But the thing is, The Boys is actually a great show and it's one of the best on television. It earns what it throws at the audience. It doesn't just show up with a bang average script with poor characters written by a writer that is a little bit too mad at the world and demands that you laugh, which is the exact vibe I got from She-Hulk. Look, ultimately, this aspect of the show isn't the be-all and end-all for me. I can get over some poorly executed social commentary or political jabs. You know, that's not my ultimate hang-up with this show. And it's far from the show's biggest issue, but this is just one aspect of why She-Hulk doesn't work. But the final piece of the puzzle for this section of the video as to why She-Hulk is bad and essentially everything that is wrong with the MCU, I mean, Disney Plus. That's it, Disney Plus. I haven't exactly made it a secret how much I do not like Disney Plus, as it's essentially just full of film scripts that have been stretched into shows, yet are somehow both short yet full of filler at the same time. She-Hulk does not break the formula of poor Disney Plus Marvel shows. The one common criticism most people have of Disney Plus shows is that they should have been a movie. Loki should have been a movie. Moon Knight should have been a movie. Hawkeye should have been a movie. Falcon and the Winter Soldier absolutely should have been a movie. Wanda Vision and She-Hulk, I could make a case that they suit a TV show format better, so I could let those two slide. But it doesn't detract from the fact that She-Hulk as a show just doesn't work, even if it actually lends itself to a show's format. And it's yet another miss on Disney Plus. But I mean, this Disney Plus crap is far from just a She-Hulk issue. This spans across the entirety of the MCU, and it's one of the biggest reasons Phase 4 has been so disappointing. But She-Hulk ultimately was just a failure, if you ask me, a comedy that isn't funny. The literal embodiment of everything that is wrong with the MCU right now. The over-reliance on cameos and nostalgia, the ham-fisted politics, the poor writing, the jokes over substance, it all just comes together to prove in a nutshell as to why She-Hulk is everything that is wrong with the MCU.